대륙간 탄도로켓 화성 14형 2차 시험 발사에서 또다시 성공.
For all its bluster and over-the-top propaganda, North Korea often does what it says it'll do when it comes to weapons development. So it goes with this lightning-quick push to perfect an intercontinental ballistic missile. The clear message from Friday's late-night test, the second in a month of a missile that may be able to reach most of U.S. mainland. Get used to it. This is a new normal. But is this the new normal? That's on Peninsula 24 today. Let's get it rolling. And in the studio with me to shed some light on this, on how advanced the North missile technology is. To my left, I have Dr. Kyun-reol, a professor of nuclear engineering at Seoul National University. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Glad to be back on the show.
And of course, as always, Dr. Chang-su. Good to see you again this week.
Good to see you again. Thank you.
Now, before we delve any further into the technology aspect of things, I want to read into what North Korea's intent is behind this night launch, and from a site that we'd actually never really perceived as a missile launch site in Chagang in the northern part of North Korea. So, what are you two reading into this?
As far as I am concerned, it's really intriguing as well as risking, in fact. Because what they're saying is that, as far as Kim Jong-un is concerned, he's saying it loud and clear that DPRK is more than ready to launch nuclear attack. By all means, anytime, any place. And my concern is that a nuclear war in the Korean Peninsula is terrifying. But at the same time, a mushroom cloud on the American soil will be horrifying as well. So we're inching toward a sort of moment truth when we have to be asking, is it going to be the end of the world or beginning of a new world? So one thing for sure is that we are living in a different world since last Friday.
Okay, the fact that they test fired another Hwasong 14 missile for the second time on the 11:11 p.m. by North Korean time is significant because it's a constant reminder that if you look at this year's New Year's speech by Kim Jong-un, that said they are entering the final stage of preparation for ICBMs, and they can fire at any time, at any place, at random time, as determined and dictated by the supreme leader. So the fact that they fired again another missile at 11 p.m. at a very different location from the previous one is a constant reminder they are ready to do that. So this is a ways to implement and perfect their capability. If you look at all these nuclear sites and the missile sites, we know where they are located. By multiplying all these using these missiles on different locations, that actually, theoretically, they multiply the targets we have to hit if there is a war in times of contingencies. So this is one way of multiplying their missile forces by shooting at a very remote places, which has never unexpected by the outside forces. So this is intentional. The timing and the location of the second missile is very significant for North Korea. So that's why they are very proud that we are this much capable. We made this kind of technical advancement for the last just 1-2 weeks. So this is just a remarkable progress. But whether it can be a real ICBM, we have different opinions on that.
Mm-hmm. Now, going on to the technological part, what we know thus far, at least based on South Korea's Defense Ministry reports and Pentagon reports, it's a missile that launched from Chagang in the northern part of North Korea. It was airborne for about 45 minutes. There are conflicting reports that it went on for 2 minutes longer, so 45 to 47, and traveled 1,000 kilometers and landed in the East Sea in Japan's exclusive economic zone. Now, explain to us in plain terms, what does this mean? How advanced is North Korea's technology based on this report that we're seeing?
I think it's a far-reach wake-up call, as well as a basically game changer. It's really jaw-dropping in the sense that they can now attack from any place, anytime. And then as far as technology is concerned, if it really turns out to be intercontinental ballistic missile, even though it's a little questionable, we're just talking about flight time, 47 minutes, good enough, healthy enough. So that they have basically mastered the basic minimal skills needed in those three basic phases: boost, mid-course, and re-entry. And if that turns out to be the case, as their claim is, then we have come to a different era as far as nuclear threat from the North is concerned. So that applies not just to Northeast Asia, but also to the world, and in general, and to the United States in particular. And they should be getting real concern about this development. It's no joke. They have to be getting serious. But again, there's a little bit of question if it was indeed ICBM or intermediate range ballistic missile, because they just used high angle trajectory. So it's hard to tell. So there's a little bit of question mark there, but certainly we are in a dangerous, it's clear and present danger that we're talking about.
Dr. Kim, is this good enough to be called an ICBM? Because I'm not exactly sure why, but Pentagon has referred to it as ICBM. South Korea has not yet. It's actually calling it ICBM class missile instead of ICBM.
Yeah, that's right. We are calling ICBM class missile. And to my understanding, Russian authority also call it IRBM, even for this latest missile,
is that right?
The IRBM. Because there are so many hypotheticals why they fire again at a lofty angle, lofty trajectory. Not because it's simply they don't have a space to fire, because it may cross over Japan or some other country. It's a tremendous violation of Japan's security, and they're making a very strong protest. So that's why they intentionally use this kind of lofty trajectory. That's a very agreeable, very something we can really accommodate, because given the spaces and the terrain, they cannot use a normal range missiles like the Russians and the United States. But I think there are some more other reasons for that. At least so far, they have fired all these missiles at a lofty angle rather than just a standard angle. That is, to some very small number of missiles experts, both in the United States and South Korea, they believe this is a kind of deception, because they have not yet mastered that standard technology for an ICBM. We are talking about the range like 11,000, 8,000. So in terms of range of the missiles, it can be called an ICBM, and that's why the United States called it ICBM. But in terms of real capability, with a missile-tipped ICBM, they can hit targets far away, and then can bring a tremendous damage to the United States or some other country. That's an ICBM. So in that kind of lethality or destructive capability, they have not reached that stage. That's why we have conflicting reports, analysis from the United States. Even from the United States, we have conflicting scholars and experts with a little bit different vision. But in terms of warning to them in the mass public, and in terms of, because we have been too much, too insensitive, I'm sorry to say this, to this kind of threat. But that's just the kind of warning that this threat is really serious, and I think there's nothing to hide about. But we have to be more accurate. So my point, and I agree with my experts in my institutions, the missile technologists, they said we should not underestimate nor overestimate North Korean missile and nuclear and missile capabilities. We have to really look at its theoretically, but quite often we tend to look at them at its face value, because they say they made a tremendous festival out of this shoots, and United States coming very close to this kind of moon. But there are some reservations still. But to the public, I think it is very important that this is what we saw, what we have seen for the last month, as a matter of fact.
Correct.
The threats are growing very fast. And so we have all kind of technological involved questions, but I think both Professor and I will cover during the remainder of the time.
Sure. I mean, but it's not just the distance that matters, right? It's also about how heavy a payload a missile can carry and travel that distance and endure, I suppose, the atmospheric pressure, whatnot, and then come back, which is the re-entry.
And the accuracy as well.
And the accuracy, precisely.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Now, so what do we know about its payload capability?
I'm really talking from the viewpoint of physicists, for example, because the basic physics tells us that if it were launched along a normal trajectory, that 3,700 kilometers altitude or maximum height translates over to actually directly to over 10,000 kilometers. So that's literally a distance from Pyongyang to all the way to Chicago, in fact, and it could even hit the heartland or East Coast in a case if that's launched good enough, because we're talking about re-entry, as you have mentioned, but there are actually at least 3 things that have to be solved before we can be talking about this threat, nuclear threat to the heartland or mainland of the American soil. And one thing has to do with temperature, because by the time the re-entry vehicle enters the atmosphere, its nose tip may reach a temperature as high as 7,000 degrees. It's pretty tough. Second of all, the re-entry vehicle must be spinning correctly enough so that it doesn't ricochet off. Third but not least, the attack of angle. The angle must be in the range of 65 to 70 degrees so that it doesn't go off the atmospheric layer. So that those 3 things. And then again, are they going to be able to hit the bullseye with precision enough so that they can attack? Because they might be coming with some multiple independently targeted re-entry vehicles, which they call MIRV. So that's the final threat. But again, I believe there are a number of unknown unknowns. Those things, more than a dozen of them. So that until they get solved, it's still mystery to me, but we are not going to underestimate their potential, not anyway, because they've made progress. Just 3 weeks, that much increase in height, that's really scary and alarming, so we have to take it seriously. And it turns out to be the fact that they have taken the second booster a little bit higher so that they got much more thrust power. So now, third test firing, if it takes place maybe this month, then they're going to really make sure that it may reach as far as East Coast of the United States. Then President Trump will get really scared, and it's actually contrary to what he tweeted. Was it March or maybe February? That ain't going to happen during my presidency, but it is going to happen.
During his
what can he
presidency.
say?
If you look at just the technical side of the launch, I believe still they have some problems, particularly in the re-entry technology. It's not that easy because, if you fire at a low angle, it's relatively easy to my colleagues because if the speed of the rocket is not that fast, and the angle into the atmosphere is also not that. It's very deep, easy to endure. So if you look at the cone of the payload, and they actually change the shape of the cone from a kind of what I call we call it looks like a pacifier. You know the formula of and into a cone. But according to it is a kind of maybe this is a very minority opinion, I should say. But they're kind of deception because that means they are trying to reach that stage to change the shape, but they have not reached that stage yet. So as Professor explained, there is a tremendous potential that they're going to, reach that kind of capability in a very short time. But also, if you look at the political side to it, because I'm a political scientist, will North Korea really go to that kind of threshold to reach to armed with the ICBMs, very accurate, very strong enough, threatening enough to strike any targets in the United States. That's another question. Because technically they have a potential to do that. But if you look at all the relationship with the United States, even China and Japan and South Korea, they should be reminded that it's also a very important political aspect to it. So I think the leadership in North Korea also consider these two, even though they say. So my theory is they're trying to show a certain level of their capability, but just before that, because otherwise it might invite a real retaliation from the United States, including preemptive strikes.
Sure.
So that's why they are also threatened by the capability by the United States. If you look at the interception capability that the United States fired 14th successful test intercepting ICBMs by THAAD, sure, and some other means as well. So the United States and for like Fort Greely in Alaska and Vandenberg Air Force Base in California, they have the capability to intercept all these incoming missiles from far away, including North Korea. So North Korea, I believe, is also testing how the United States is capable of intercepting their missiles. So I think they are just looking at each other. So that's why they said it's going to fire another missile at a random time as determined by the great supreme leader. So this is a very political, but again, this is a game changer, as Professor Su mentioned, because many people actually said last year, this January of last year, they made the 5th nuclear test. Some people said it's nuclear, it was a game changer. But I was not agreeing with these people because there are maybe, if that's a real game changer, there's a lot of game changers in the years to come. But again, this time is a really serious threat, and increasingly, not by the United States Trump government, but also the Moon government in Seoul. They are beginning to see the very serious threats from North Korea. That's why, in just overnight, he changed his decision about the THAAD, and he also already our independence means to counter North Korean missiles. Kill chain and KMD and KMPR. So this is a real game changer for not only for the United States but for South Korea as well.
Sometimes the best defense is great offense. So I think that's one of the orders that South Korean President Moon Jae-in is taking following Friday's launch. Now, following Friday's launch immediately, so within hours after the launch, President Moon Jae-in ordered a couple things at the NSC meeting, National Security Council meeting, one of which included, of course, the deployment of THAAD. So the rest of the 4 launchers that were tucked away in U.S. bases here in South Korea. But also talking about revising the two countries' ballistic missile guidelines. So there is this ballistic missile range guidelines agreed upon by South Korea and the U.S. It was first written in 1979, and basically it puts a cap on the range and of which South Korea can develop and possess its missiles, correct? It was revised twice. Now, explain to us how or whether a revision to this would give South Korea the edge it needs to defend itself against North Korea.
I don't think it's good enough because I guess we're talking about missile technology control regime, which are being bound, and then payload, actually. I forgot about mentioning payload last time, but again, 2 things. Payload. It used to be 500 kilograms. It's not good enough. So we're really trying to upgrade to at least a ton. And actually, it just coincidence that 1 ton corresponds to the weight of primitive thermonuclear bomb, which we call AKA hydrogen bomb. But this Hyunmoo missiles have nothing to do with nuke bombs. It just it's going to be carrying conventional explosives. But anyway, it's a good idea to be increasing the payload from 500 to 1,000 kilograms, one thing. As far as the range, I believe Hyunmoo 3, actually 2 series as well, are limited to 800 kilometers. Actually, that's good enough to hit any place. In DPRK, that's good enough, but I'm really talking about payload, which has to be increased because it will be loaded with conventional explosives, and 500 kilograms, just too little to do any meaningful damage to DPRK's facilities. So it's good to be increasing it, but at the same time, there's another thing that we can possibly do, cruise missiles. If my understanding is correct, cruise missiles are not necessarily bound to limit. So the longest range is as far as 3,000 kilometers, more than enough to basically bunker bust any place in North Korea. So that we have two things. So as far as I'm concerned, ballistic missiles are limited to 800 kilometers, but cruise missiles with much more precise guidance system can fly as long as 3,000 kilometers. And you mentioned THAAD. I believe we can talk about it a little briefly, but then again, you know what? THAAD is like to my knowledge, sci-fi, because we are trying to shoot down very fast-moving bullet with another faster-moving bullet. It's like finding a needle in a haystack and then shoot it down. They are like Mach 25. Can you guess? This is like 30,000 kilometers per hour. It's like almost 10 kilometers per second. You're trying to hit this, and then it's pretty hard, almost impracticability. I don't think so. But anyway, THAAD is going to be working. Maybe it's good to have one than having none of them. But
right.
again, there's a limit. Better than nothing, but I don't think so. All cure.
So how capable is South Korea in defending itself should war break out? Or better yet, how can it prevent North Korea from attacking South Korea with a preemptive strike of some sort?
Well, aside from the warheads, nuke versus non-nuke, which is essentially asymmetric, we can be really looking at the delivery system. And if we can take a look at the ballistic missile, for example, ICBM or IRBM, I believe we're far behind because I'm just looking at their numbers. For example, they are talking about 10,000 kilometers, we're talking about 800 kilometers. So that's a clear sign that we're far behind. It's not because we're technically incapable, but because we're really bound with these political, basically, requirement or actually burden as far as our development is concerned. And also, submarine-launched ballistic SLBM, we're still, I think, lagging behind, unfortunately, because they've already done so a couple of times. And I believe that's a great success to my eyes. But then again, I'm not sure if we have done it on Changbok, or maybe we're going to do that, but as far as cold launching, I think we're getting there. But again, it's not because of our technical incapability, but rather because of political pressures in and out. That's really keeping us from making any meaningful progress toward.
I think the leadership in South Korea and the U.S. are both realizing that, like it or not, we are faced with a very new North Korea, a North Korea with a never-before-seen advanced level of technology in terms of weapons development. And I suppose this is the time for the leaderships in Seoul and Washington to really put together a good strategy in terms of countering North Korean threats. Do you have any closing remarks for this session, missiles?
Again, I guess we've finally come to the moment of truth to be asking ourselves, is the United States going to be salvaging Seoul while a nuke is detonating in the skies of Washington, D.C.? That's exactly what President Charles de Gaulle asked some 60 years ago. And then he went on to making bombs. So I think it's about time to think about real seriously. It's time.
My comment to your question is, I'm glad that finally the new leadership in South Korea has finally recognized the seriousness, the importance of North Korean missile and military threats. Before that, they thought, oh, it is serious, but now they physically can feel that this is an incoming threat to us, and this must be a #1 priority for the new leadership in South Korea. I think, so as a matter of fact, it's good, it's fortunate that we are finally entering this stage that we can really see ourselves with our own eyes, and we just delayed the kind of engagement part and dialogue for the moment. So we have to solve these North Korean threats more effectively, more rapidly. And if this is a kind of widespread recognition among the cabinet members in the Blue House, I think this is a good sign for us, as a matter of fact, fortunately.
And President Moon Jae-in has said that his engagement policy of dialogue is meaningless unless our military capabilities and military power dominates that of North Korea's. At this point, we need to be working on that and focusing on that. Well, Dr. Seo Kyun-reol, thank you so much for speaking to us today. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
And Dr. Kim, as always, thank you.
My pleasure.
And we would like to thank all of you as well. Survival of the fittest is something Charles Darwin taught us 200 years ago. And those of us who adapt to changes come out as winners. So perhaps it's now time for us to adapt to changes and face the situation fair and square. That's Peninsula 24 this week. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next week.